I feel as though I'm still deep in thought and processing a lot of what I just listened to. I just listened to the first two chapters of The Creative Act, and there were quite a few concepts that really resonated with me. And even more interesting, there were quite a few concepts that were related to the video I just recorded. I think it's interesting how when you're looking for something in the world, when you're discovering some aspect of yourself, you become more attuned to the signal that the world is giving you, and you start to notice that particular inclination more regularly. When you hear a word, you start hearing it over and over again. It's like the recognition of repetition of a word. The first chapter was called Everyone is a Creator. And I think this is a very important lesson. I'm really glad that he started the book out like this. It's actually something that I've been writing about in my newsletter for the past 20 weeks or so. We tend to have this perception in society that creators are artists or creators are influencers, and content creation is this almost negative thing. But art is this incredible thing, but not everyone can be an artist. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I think when we start to bring in what it actually means to create something, which Rick Rubin defined as the creation of something that wasn't there before. Well, that applies to knowledge workers, people that work in corporations. There are people who generate emails, that wasn't there before. Patents, for example, legal documents, contracts. There are so many ways that we create that we just don't think about, that we don't identify as creators. And I think that's the wrong way to look at things, because like Rick was talking about, to be creative is to be human. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning of the video too. I think too much of society is trying to put us into boxes, saying we need to behave this way, we need to do these actions, we need to be very logical because logic equals value. But that's what machines are for. Logic is something that can be automated and replaced. And creativity, while of course there's DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and Adobe Firefly, there's all these AI art generators. They're still requiring, at this point anyways, human input to generate that original creation. There has to be some spark of humanity. And the art that I think is generated without that spark of humanity, the artificial intelligence art, it's missing the feeling and the depth of emotion. I think that same type of lack of emotion, lack of connection, is what we end up reinforcing through the cycles of corporate work and knowledge work, where we tell people to do the same thing over and over and over again. And yes, you can improve on it, but at some point, we need to break through that barrier. We need to get out of the container, and we need to look at the world in a more beauty-oriented fashion. I've been listening to a Waking Up series called The Art of Noticing, and it talks about how creative people are very good at paying attention. They're the people that pay attention to things that others tend to overlook. And this is a concept that Rick also was just talking about in The Creative Act, where creativity arises from paying attention to things. And I think this is another issue that we're facing in our society, where people are so accustomed to just scrolling through their phones. Every time they get uncomfortable, they miss out on paying attention to actually experiencing life itself. If we begin to associate everyday actions with creativity and our own unique expression of our experiences, if we can pay attention to that, then we're much better able to find balance between our different selves. We're able to balance the logic and the creative sides of our brains so that we can be the whole human that we are. Rick mentioned that paying attention is really what generates and creates our reality. And this is a big concept in mindfulness as well. And just generally, I think with our own understanding of what it means to be human, we have this worldview, we have this perspective where we're taking in all of this sensory information all the time through our different senses, and we're piecing it together and making connections, and that is how we end up generating our own truth. We perceive our own reality, and our mind is what makes that perception. The second chapter was called Tuning In, and Rick was getting to this concept where artists are the ones that tend to pick up on the signal in the noise, which is also interesting because that's a particular phrase that I just used in the first part of the video. And I think that's starting to be a big trend in our culture with the overwhelming amount of information that we get from scrolling through social media all the time. It becomes hard to identify the signal, the valuable data in the overall noise that we just get bombarded with all the time. Rick described artists as being the translators of this information that they're picking up. They're more finely attuned, like antenna, to the signal that the universe is putting out. So they're better able to pick up on the nuance and identify what is actually signal and what is actually noise. And this is part of what I've really been exploring over the past 20 weeks. I've been trying to follow my own intuition to see what paths I get drawn down without overthinking it. Though I'm not always successful, I tend to overthink generally. It's something I'm working on. And I think overthinking tends to lead to burnout because I don't just go with the flow. I don't just follow my own intuition. I think it's really interesting that Rick was talking about the waves of signal that the universe puts out there, because when I was down by the water this afternoon and just watching the waves form and disappear and form and disappear, I was struck with what it means to just be myself and to just exist, and what it means to take in my sensory experiences and live my own life. I tend to have ideas that come into existence, and then if I don't act on them quickly enough, or I feel if I don't act on them quickly enough, they tend to just disappear and go back. And maybe they'll pop up again some other day, but I feel as though I've slightly missed out on that opportunity. I think artists are kind of like this, where they're the ones that, because they're so finely attuned to the universe, through their own sensory experience, they're better able to pick up on the waves that are of value. And if they don't pick up on that wave, well, the wave just continues moving on and someone else is able to pick up on it. The way that Rick describes being able to pick up on that wave, the wave of intuition, of the signal that's being put out by the universe, is by actually not going out to go look for it. It's, instead of overthinking, like I tend to, just letting go and going with the flow. The waves are going to appear and they're going to disappear. There's no use in trying to chase after it. I should just experience it when it comes in. And that's a difficult lesson to learn because of how society tends to value our overproductivity. We like to be productive all the time. We like to be doing things. We don't like to just be. Just being tends to scare us. So the more we can learn to let go and just be, the more we will begin to attune ourselves to what our experiences are trying to tell us and what our past experiences are triggering as intuition moments, flashes of insight that indicate to us that a particular wave of experience is of more value to us than the other experiences that we've gone through. Rick also mentions that children are excellent at this. They take in information, they internalize it, they move on to the next thing. They experience awe and wonder and joy, and they just are there in that moment, present, without overthinking, without comparing it to the past, comparing it to the knowledge that they think they've gained over time, which they have, but past knowledge does not equal future action. Past knowledge merely provides an indicator on what could intuitively help us in our future, but it doesn't set our course for us. It just maybe points us in the right direction, but it is more of a guideline, more of a general direction than a set series of rules to follow. And I think that's currently where society is slipping a bit. We feel as though we need to follow our steps. We need to have all of this structure in place so that we can continue generating value in the same way that we've generated value over the last 50 years. The problem is that that value system is going to change with artificial intelligence. We can't keep going forward expecting logic to be the answer to everything. We need to begin attuning ourselves to our own humanity so that we can follow our own intuition down our own paths and identify what makes us unique. What makes me different than everyone else is my perspective on the world. How can I then express that with other people? That's a bit of a different question. The way that Rick described the childhood awe, the childhood feeling of just being, and the relationship of letting go and just experiencing life as it is, it reminded me of the Zen concept of beginner's mind, which has been touched on in different mindfulness sessions that I've gone through. But the essence is that every time you sit down to begin meditating, every time you sit down to begin anything, let go of everything you think you know. because that's just going to get in the way. It's better to move forward, taking in the information as it is, than constantly be looking in the rearview mirror to dictate the direction that you want to go. It's better to follow your gut and your intuition, something that you've been carefully crafting and training your entire life. Something that I'm learning, something that I need to recognize more regularly, is that this attunation, this connection to myself and the world at large, my ability to ride the waves or choose to go against it, is something that just comes with practice. And that's what I'm doing now, is I'm trying to practice expressing myself. And it's a little bit meta, it's a little bit strange to think about, but I am actually having fun doing this. I'm enjoying it. I like having a prompt, like a book, or even just thinking about going to do something. It helps provide me with a general direction, and then I can course out my own path as I go. Another really interesting aspect of what Rick said is that when he was talking about waves, we were talking about how an electron in our mind can be in two places at once. This is quantum principles, the waveform, or the wave function in quantum physics, where we know generally that an electron is within a particular range, but we don't know exactly where it is because measuring it causes it to change its position. Based on Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, we can either know where the particle is or how fast it's going, but not both. So we end up generating this model that represents where a given electron could be at any particular point in time. It's interesting that the quantum representation of this electron is through the wave function. It's something that moves and changes over time and changes position, much like I was just talking about with the way that ideas and concepts emerge, and artists are there attuned to those changes so that they can pick up on the signal and differentiate it from the noise. And that's what they use as the motivation and the insight to generate their works of art. I think it's more important than ever that we stop associating that intuition, that creative path, with only artists. This is something that every single human goes through. And the more we can begin modifying how we value these types of actions in society, the more we start breaking out of our logic-based boxes, the more we can get past our own limitations that we've perceived and conceived in our own mind. Our mind makes our reality. And the sooner we'll be able to tap into our own individual humanity. I'm really enjoying this book so far. I like how short the chapters are. I like that they're kind of almost like mindfulness sessions, which is something I've been practicing a lot over the last couple years, really. And I'm looking forward to seeing where else this goes.